Greetings everyone and welcome to the video. In this video I'm going to be covering a paint scheme for the Space Wolves. In this video we'll be exploring alternative painting techniques, which includes using the use of filters and tints to create your miniature. We'll also be exploring some Grimdark weathering techniques, and I'll also show you my favouriteest way to create a snowy base theme. Greetings everyone, I'm Nate the Feral Painter and thanks for joining me on this tutorial. Just a few things before we do get into the bulk of the video. You're probably wondering, what is this miniature, where is it from? And unfortunately it's not a Games Workshop miniature. I will leave a link to the creator of this STL, as this is a 3D printed miniature. Those of you that know me, you've probably noticed if you follow my Instagram, I've recently got into 3D printing. I'm not perfect with it, I'm not the best 3D printer, so some of the close-ups you'll probably notice some anti-aliasing, so if you want to pop that in the comments, I'm sure someone will point that out. But yeah, I'm still learning settings and stuff, but you know, I saw this one and it really jived me. This is something that I believe the Space Wolves do look like, and with the launch and the announcement of the new Space Wolves, this came at a perfect time. I filmed it last weekend and then they announced the new Space Wolves as well. So if this tutorial is not for you because it is a bit alternative to normal painting schemes, then I'm sure in the future I will be covering the new Space Wolves refresh, if that's what it's called. So make sure you are hitting that subscribe button to not miss out on any of those videos. The inspiration for this paint scheme did come from Zach Castigoon over at the Grimdark Compendium, a video we released a while ago, and also I would highly recommend going out and checking the Space Wolves course over at the Grimdark Compendium. If you're interested in more Space Wolf tutorials and grimdarkness, then I'd highly recommend going over and checking that out. There are some similarities, however I've done mine a little bit different, added some little parts to it and just alternatively changed some pieces of it. But the main focus and guide, the technique that we're going to be looking at in this video is around filters and tints to enable you to quickly paint up your miniatures from either a grey or a white base coat prime. I will also be going over some alternative techniques because I do use an airbrush in this video for the filtering. I think that's the best way to be able to do it. However, there are ways that we can still do it with a brush, so don't click off it just yet because I'm sure you'll be able to take something from this video. There's loads of little gems and nuggets scattered throughout it. But if you are interested in an airbrush, or you've maybe looking at exploring that market, then I'd highly recommend going over and checking out my recent video where I reviewed a new starter kit, and everything you need is in there and it doesn't break the bank. And there's also a 10% discount code available for that, so make sure you go over and check that video out as well. Also, this technique doesn't just apply to the Space Wolf scheme. You can change the colors, and this will also enable you to be able to paint up alternative miniatures and armor recipes and even skin recipes. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into this tutorial. So the colour recipe for this armour is one that I wanted to reflect and pay homage to the old Heresy style armour, with one that's a little bit more grey rather than the new palish blue tint of the new Space Wolves. I do have a ton of different recipes for the Space Wolves, and ones that I'm sure I'll cover in later videos when those new box sets get released. But the way to start with this tinting and filtering technique obviously starts at the priming phase. And to be able to do this, I've used the use of STYNALREZ grey primer. Alternatively, you can use something like a rattle can version, or your favourite grey primer one that's a little bit more like this. I do recommend probably adding a zenithal if you're going to be doing something like skin, or one that's a little bit brighter. I do wish I'd added just some hints of highlights to this, maybe to the top of the shoulder pauldrons and coming down onto his leg. Doesn't really matter because we're going to shift that with the filters themselves. So to start with, I've loaded up some COLIA GREENSHADE into my airbrush, and I'm just very lightly at around 15 psi just aiming upwards, and the goal here is to hit all the shadow to mid-tone. So I'm just working my way around the miniature, and you'll notice in the video that I do tilt it back a little bit just to get those deeper shadows, but this is just going to very lightly, because the actual inks themselves are transparent, you're going to get that grey showing through, but it's going to tint it more into that cold temperature tone, which is something I'll speak about a little bit later on, because we want to create some variation. We want some warm tones and some actual cold tones itself. So it's going to have like a cold armor tone, and that's going to be complemented by the warm like fur and alternative pieces on this miniature. So you've got those nice two tones going on. Now for the deepest shadow, so this lean back section, you can see I've switched now to, I think it's DRAGANOFF Nightshade, the dark blue from Citadel. And alt colours for this scheme as well will be in the description below, so if you want to check them out and grab the colours for yourself, there they are. But so what we've done first of all is we've primed it in a grey just to quickly cover everything again. I've gone round and filtered with COLIA green just to tint the armour slightly, and then as even some deeper shadows and to knock back some of that grey armour and lean it more into that blue of the new Space Wolves. Just on the darkest sections like under his legs and under his chest and arms, I've gone in there with a darker blue ink from Citadel. As I said, if you've not got an airbrush, you could just go in there with a brush and just give it an overall wash. It will give it a different look, but it'll still stay similarity, and you'll get some nice little shadows in between the details and stuff. But you can just go in there and just literally coat it all in it, maybe mix it with some water so it's not overpowering. And if you are confident with glazing with a brush, you could just go in there and glaze these. It'll take a little bit longer, but I'm sure you'll achieve these similar results. I then did the same technique on the fur pelt, and this was using DARKOATH Flesh, the contrast paint from Citadel, and this was to contrast against the cold tone and add a little bit of warmth and shadows to the actual pelt itself. So now you've got like a nice warm tone and the cold tone of the armor. Naturally, we are going to come back in and add some more paint to the pelts and other sections, which we'll jump into a little bit later on. But to quickly recap and go over, why I'm using these filters. One, because it's a quick and effective, easy way. I've not added tons of different base coat colours and highlights. We've literally primed the miniature and gone straight in with some tints and filters. But like I said, these filters can also apply to a plethora of different techniques within your painting style. One of them, because I've used this cold tone, you can create temperature shifts in the actual miniature itself from a colder to a warm tone. Let's say if you're doing something like a blood angel, you might use a darker red or even a purple to create the shadow effects. And I'm sure you've all seen, if you're a follower of my channel, especially when it comes to skin recipes and stuff, I do utilize this filtering quite a lot by tilting the miniature back and spraying up into those shadows. And you can even use ones that are like contrast paints or speed paints. Any filter or paint that's got that transparent nature will work for this technique. After you've completed that and you've given it ample time to dry, we're going to move on to a optional step, as this step does require a little bit of knowledge and precision and a little bit of a gentle touch. So I want to create some mottling and like a mottled effect on the armor from the tints of the COLIA green and the blue that we've just added. And to do this, I've just loaded up some isopropyl alcohol, 99%, just very lightly dampened a Q-tip with this. And again, you've got to be careful with this because it's such an abrasive chemical. It can, if you're pressing on too hard, it can burn down and go through the actual primer itself down to the bare resin or the plastic. So just be very gentle with this. It's minimal amounts, and like I say, you can always come back in if you feel it's not working. Just keep dabbing it and attacking it. But what this is going to do, it's going to lift away some of that acrylic paint just to reveal the primer underneath. Again, using that gentle touch not to burn through it. And then once it's dry, because you've pulled some bits away, you're left with this like sort of mottled effects, which will just play into the weathered look of the armour. Again, this is just an optional step. It's not something that you have to do. It's one that I just do on there. It's sort of just going to sit in the background. You're not really going to see it unless you pick the miniature up and look really closely. So just take of this what you will, but it's just one little effect and detail that I do add to the miniature. At this point is a good idea to go in and base coat the rest of your miniature out. Again, you are ultimately going to come across some sections that you are going to actually have to apply some physical acrylic paints rather than the filters, such as like his tabards and some leather parts, and also the metallics. However, for places like the PELT and stuff, I've used some contrast paints because we've got that grey brightish undertone primer. We can easily go in there with contrast paints and use the filters and use a different variety of browns to be able to filter and tint the actual pelt itself. And this is just using some speed paint, so it's again a really quick and effective, easy way to go in there and base coat out your miniature. You may have your alternative colours that you desire. All the base coats and colours for this Space Wolf will be in the description below. For the gold section, which I want to talk about, I wanted to play into that warm and cold tones. So I've gone in there with a really nice warm golden tone. And for this, I've actually used Pro Acryl Bronze as the base coat. And then I've come in there just very lightly with a brush in a sketchy style. I'm not really paying much attention to details at this point, because I want that mottled look. I'm just tapping it and adding some little squiggles of highlights of PERIDOT Alchemy. And then finally I mix in a little bit of silver with that as one final highlight for the gold. So we've got some nice looking gold with highlights, but we've still got that nice warm undertone of the Pro Acryl Bronze, which is perfect for our golden armor, giving us that nice temperature shift between the cold armor and the warm tones of the pelt and the trim gold sections. Now moving on to the first stage of weathering, and of course, being a Grimdark channel, I'm going to be utilising enamel paints, and specifically I'm going to be using VILLAINY Inc.'s Goons Grime. Now I'm going to apply this through an airbrush. You don't have to do that. I've got tons of videos here on this channel and over at the Grimdark Compendium explaining how to use these paints, the ways that we can do the reductive technique. So if you've never used enamels and you're not sure about what they are, then I highly recommend going over and checking out this video on the Grimdark Compendium to learn about enamels and the reductive technique. Everything you need to know is in there, but I will go over some of my choices and the reasoning for that. And I always do like to apply my enamels through an airbrush, depending for the situation if it calls for it. But using an airbrush just allows me to apply and build up even coats around the miniature, because I'm going to be building this up quite heavily around the miniature. So I'm going to pretty much darken the miniature out in the Goons Grime to make sure it's got that heavy application. But as usual, I'm paying special attention to the lower half of the miniature, where dirt and grime would naturally be building up that little bit more. Now, to thin it through an airbrush, you're just going to do the exact same as what you would if you're going to apply it via brush, so in a 1:1 ratio. So I've added 6 drops of the Goons Grime plus 6 drops of mineral spirits to this airbrush, and then I'm just lightly working my way around it, letting areas dry whilst I'm spraying other areas, and then coming back in for maybe a second coat just to build up those darker in like the darker in the parts. What am I on about? To just build it up darker in the sections that I require it. Now I'm going to give that around 15 minutes to dry. I do use a blow dry to speed up that process. And once it is dry, you'll see it turns really matte and chalky, and then we can come in with our removal process. Because I wanted him to be really dirty, I go around first of all with these makeup sponges. You can use a Q-tip for this as well. The only reason I like to use these sponges is because I've learned to use them a bit and I can control it a little bit more, but just some household Q-tips will work just fine. And I'll lightly moisten it with mineral spirits and just start to dab and pull back off that Goons Grime, and then I can go back in there with a brush for a more refined, controlled application or removal. And I even turned some of these into streaks as well. And again, I give that around 15 minutes to dry before I continue painting the rest of the miniature. Again, if you're not familiar with enamels and how to apply them and remove them, or even what they are, then again, go over and check out that reductive technique video over at the Grimdark Compendium. So for the flesh application, it's quite a simple recipe. Again, we're going to utilize some filters, but I'm just going to base coat out everything in KISLEV flesh, and then just lightly add a little bit of FLAYED flesh just for some highlights before giving it a overall wash of Citadel's TAGOR Raid Shade. This will just tint it more into a flesh color, and also because it's got that purpley cold tone, it's going to be perfect again for that temperature of this miniature. And because he's out in the snow, he's going to get some rosy cheeks, so I've just got some CARRABURG crimson, and I just lightly glaze this onto the cheekbones and the cheek areas. You can even add a little bit so he's got a nice little rosy nose if you want to do that. And then finally just add in a little bit again of the COLIA green shade just around the eyes, just to darken them up and sink them in a little bit more. Now for his hair, you can just sort of leave it as it is if you want that grey hair like the older Space Marine, or if you're wanting to tint it into more of the blonde look, again, we're just going to be using contrast paints and filters just to be able to add that blondish hair to the Space Wolf. So the last part of weathering and the last thing to do on this miniature once you've refined everything is just to add some Dirty Downs rust. Now I know people are going to be jumping straight in the comment section and saying ceramite doesn't rust, which is fine. If you want to do it lore accurate, leave the rust out, add some more streaks. But I like to add a little bit of rust because it's the Grimdark aesthetic, and maybe an argument could be made for the weathering has somehow put rust on him and weathered the armour. I don't know. I don't really care too much about being lore accurate. I just love adding rust to my miniatures. I think it looks amazing. It's probably really fitting to the Space Wolves due to the elements that they're potentially exposed to. But I've just come in here with some Dirty Downs rust. It's one of my favouriteest products on the market at the moment, and if you've never used it, go out and grab some. It's absolutely amazing. So it is water soluble, so you don't need any mineral spirits or anything like that to be able to use it. Now I have done a couple of masterclasses on this channel and some hints and tips to, using the Dirty Downs rust, so please go and check them out as well. We'll just go over some tips and some hints for this style of application. Is with your Dirty Downs rust, some best hints I can give you is the bottle does need to be a warmish temperature, like room temperature. We're not talking heat or anything. So what I tend to do, if I know I'm going to be using it in about 15 minutes time, I tend to put it in my pocket when I'm sat down. That'll just warm it up, and then naturally you've got to give it a good shake because it does settle and sit at the bottom of the bottle. So make sure you're giving it a good shake. If you've got a vortex mixer, use that. It'll just mix it up really nice. And then I'm just coming in, loading small amounts onto my brush and just really taking my time, just adding a little bit, letting that dry, and then adding a little bit more to darken it up if I need to. And if, because of the magic of the Dirty Downs rust, if you want it to apply a little bit of a lighter rust tone, you just simply add or mix a little bit of water in it. I'm not going to go overboard with this. I'm just going to work my way around the miniature. And again, if you do make mistakes with this, it's a really good product that you can just get some water and simply wipe it away. But once obviously it's cured and stuff, then I think you can reactivate it after a short amount of time. I'm not 100%, I've not fully experimented with it, but I'm just working my way around it and adding a little bit of rust to the miniature. And the final reason I went for the rust is again because it's a rust warm tone. It finally comes back to all this temperature and filtering and just adding these nice tones around the miniature, and it's going to complement the cold warm armor, no, the cold armor against the actual rust itself. Now let's talk about basing and how to get a nice realistic looking snowy base. Now the base on this miniature, the only thing I've really painted were the skulls. So I've built it up just using cork and adding a little bit of texture paste, scattered some skulls around it, and then that's it. Because we've done and painted the miniature, your base is already going to have those tones and colours on that we're looking for really. It's like a greyish stone type of look. You can add some pigment powders in there. You'll see I've dusted a little bit up onto the legs, just using like a white creamish dusty pigment powder, and then what I've done is just painted a couple of the stones. But there's really not much to this. You don't have to paint it or do anything like that, and then we're just going to apply some products to be able to get that snow and ice effect. So for this, I'm using AK Snow acrylics. This is it's a little bit better than the Citadel one. You get more with it, and it's a lot cheaper, and also it just looks a little bit more like real snow. It's quite fluffy. It's almost like, if anyone's ever had here in the UK Angel Delight or know what Angel Delight is, it's that sort of consistency. It's quite fluffy, but it does go on there really nice. Now, I'm not just going to get it on and spread it about. What you'll notice is sometimes, obviously, if I've got a large amount, I'm sort of just wicking it off my brush, but I'm applying it in almost a stippling motion, just here, there, and everywhere around the miniature. I do dust up a little bit onto the legs and the actual cloak of and his pelt of the miniature, just to tie it into the base, as though a little bit of snow's gone on him and settled on there. But just applying it in this stippling motion, just in sections of the miniature. This is where you want your heavy snow to be. So this product is where you want all your heavy snow to be. But just remember to add a little bit around onto the legs of the miniature as well, to make it look like he's trudging through slushy, awful snow. And what I liked about this as well is, because I think it's got a little bit of water in it, it reacted with the Dirty Downs rust, which I just thought it looked a really nice weather element, because it tinted it a little bit orange, as though, you know, some snow had melted some of that rust and it had just got a little bit gnarly around the miniature. But just work your way around, and you can move on to the next stage before it even dries, because that'll just help the actual next phase of the snow base just settle and make everything look, and it'll just sort of glue it in without applying any glue. So after that, there's also AK do another product called Snow Micro Balloons, and this is more like the actual sprinkles of snow, like snowflakes, and it's a really nice product to use in conjunction with this snow, because we're going to make it look like some of that snow started to melt a little bit, exposing the earth underneath. Again, you can go as heavy or as little as you want with this, but the Snow Micro Balloons, they're just really, really light and fluffy, and you just sprinkle these in and around where you want, again adding a little bit to the miniature. And because that actual other snow is already drying, it's going to stick to that and allow it to stick to the base. However, you are going to come across sections where it's not adhered, and to do that I just get a little bit of PVA glue and water and drop that onto the miniature. Again, with these micro balloons, I do sprinkle some more a little bit throughout when I add the next stages, but again, you can go as heavy or as light as you want with this, and if you find you've put a bit too much on, you can just quickly dust that off. Now for the final special effect to this snow, and as I said, I wanted this snow to look like it's not really fresh, it's just started to melt and settle. And you'll know, if you've ever been around snow, after a few days you get this awful hard slushy type snow. And to be able to create that, I'm going to utilize the AK Ice Sparkles. I'm going to get a little bit of a tin, and I'm going to mix that with a few drops of acrylic water effects. So there's plenty of products on the market for these water effects, such as like AK Puddles, AK Water, but just a nice clear water one is what I wanted to use for this. So I've just mixed that together in a bowl, and it'll almost come out like a slush. So it basically looks like a real slush, so don't eat it or try and drink it or anything. And I'm just going to add this to sections around where I want the snow to start melting, or if you're trundling along, you might put this in where the footprints have been. And I also add a little bit of this again to the top of the miniature, as though the snow started to settle. And because it's got that water effects in there, that's also going to let it dry really glossy and make it look a little bit wet, just as slushy not fresh snow, but slushy snow would actually look. And then again, if you want to come in with some more of those micro balloons and sprinkle those on, and that is your snowy base complete. And that brings us to the end of this tutorial. So just before you click off, there's a few little things that I want to go over, some refinements and some final thoughts. Again, this video is just around tinting. I'm not saying this is the correct way to paint Space Marines or Space Wolves or anything like that. I do have some videos coming out in the future when that new Space Wolves box set gets released. I'm sure I'll be attacking that and going through some more alternative of my colour schemes for you to be able to utilize. So make sure you are hitting that subscribe button to not not miss out on any of that. And as promised, obviously I'm still going on there and currently doing the Emperor's Children. We've got the Noise Marine, Space Marines coming out just after this video, and then I've also got some more exciting videos planned for you guys. If you are interested in some of the products that you've seen in this video, then I do have some affiliate links in the comment section, in the description should I say. My words are just not on point today, but I could edit them out, but I'm lazy. So all that is in the description below, and I just get a little bit of a kickback from that, which helps me continue making these videos for you. So thank you all for watching this video. Let me know if you like it, hit that like button, it really helps me get this video out there. Leave me a comment as well, let me know what you think of it. If you've got any questions at all, then let me know in the comment section below. But until next time guys, I will catch you in my next video.